Summary statistics. Measures of location. After our discussion on the measures of central tendency, we will now go to the measures of location. The measures of location include the median, as we have learned a while ago, percentile, quartiles, and deciles. And what do they do? They simply indicate the relative position of an observation inside the distribution. First, before anything else, take note that when we're dealing with the measures of location, our observations should be sorted in some sort of natural progression. Because of course, we want to know the location of an observation with respect to its relative position in the distribution. Okay, so let's first recall. For the median, it divides the observations into two equal parts. So, if we draw a scale from 0 to 100, and divide the scale into two equal parts, then the median is located at 50. Suppose we compute the value of the median for a given data set of scores and got a value of 85. Then we say that at least 50% of the observations have scores less than or equal to 85. Or, we can interpret the complement and say that at least 50% of the observations have scores greater than or equal to 85. Now, for the quartiles. We have 4 equal parts. If we divide the scale into 4 equal parts, then we will have the first quartile, the second quartile, and the third quartile. If we use the same data set that we used in computing for the median, the value of the second quartile, Q2, should also be equal to 85. So, what does this tell us? The median is equal to the second quartile, Q2. And Q2 and the median have the same interpretations. Suppose that we compute for the first quartile and get a value of 70. How do we interpret this? We say that at least 25% of the observations have scores less than or equal to 70. Or we can interpret the complement and say that at least 75% of the observations have scores greater than or equal to 70. Now, let's look at the third quartile. Suppose that we get a value of 90 for the third quartile. What is its interpretation? We say that at least 25% of the observations have scores greater than or equal to 90. Or we can also interpret the complement and say that at least 75% of the observations have scores less than or equal to 90. Now, let's move on to deciles. We have 10 equal parts. And from the scale, we will have D1, D2, up until D9. Suppose that we use the same data set of scores to compute for the fifth decile, D5. What will be its value? It is also 85. Thus, the median, Q2, and D5 are equal. Suppose that we compute for the second decile, D2, and get a value of 69. Its interpretation will be 20% of the observations have scores less than or equal to 69. Or, we can interpret the complement and say that at least 80% of the observations have scores greater than or equal to 69. On the other hand, if we compute or ask for the 8th decile and we get a value of 98, then our interpretation will be at least 20% of the observations have scores greater than or equal to 98. Or, we can interpret the complement and say that at least 80% of the observations have scores less than or equal to 98. Lastly, we will have percentiles. We have 100 equal parts. And from the scale, we will have P1 to P99. Using the same data set of scores, P50 is equal to the median, Q2, and D5. What quartile is equal to P25? Q1. What quartile is equal to P75? Q3. What decile is equivalent to P20? That is D2. And what decile is equivalent to P80? That is D8. So, these are the relationships of the different measures of location. What we are trying to show here is that the beauty of the measures of location is that we simply compute for the percentiles to be able to get the median, the quartiles, and the deciles. What is the use of measures of location? It tells us the location or position of an individual with respect to a group. Okay, so what are the examples? In board exam results, in national examination scores like the National Achievement Test, and also for income classification. So let's have an example in the next slide. I am quite sure every one of us in one way or another have known someone, or that you yourself have taken the board exam. It is nerve-wracking whenever we anticipate the announcements of the results of the board exams. I mean, who wouldn't be nervous? To illustrate this example, let's name a person. Let us assume that somebody named John took the last board exam. When the results of the board exam came out, it was announced that John's exam score belongs to the upper 10% of those who took the board exam. What percentile am I referring to? Correct, it is the 90th percentile. And how do we interpret the 90th percentile? We say 90% of those who took the board exams have scores less than or equal to the 90th percentile value. Or 10% of those who took the board exams got scores greater than or equal to the 90th percentile value. Now, let's go back to the announcement. John's score belongs to the upper 10% of all those who took the board exam. Let's say CPA. Take note. Do we know the score of John based on the announcement? No. That is the idea of the measures of location. We simply know their position or location with regards to all those who took the board exam. And what is his position? He belongs to the upper 10% of those who took the board exam. Now, what is the meaning of upper 10%? It means that we are looking at least the 90th percentile. It means 90% or more. Meaning, John's score can be in the 90th, 91st, 92nd, 93rd, 94th, 95th, 96th, and so on. Now, since John's score belongs to the upper 10% of those who took the board exam, will he be happy? Yes. Why? At least 90% of those who took the board exams got scores lower or equal to John's score. And that is still impressive. Now, what is the passing score for CPA board exams? Let's say the passing score is 75. Suppose that P90 is equal to 75. Are we assured that John passed the board exams? Yes. Because at least 10% of those who took the board exams got scores greater than or equal to 75. Suppose that P90 is equal to 74. Are we assured that John passed the board exams? No. So, John might belong to the upper 10%, but still did not pass the board exam. Again, the measures of location simply tell you your position with respect to a group. It does not tell you your score. Let us now have the example on the desire. Now, before we look at the data, I want you all to try and compute for your average annual family income. And keep that in mind, or write it on a piece of paper. Okay? Did you get your average annual family income? Now, let's look at the 2018 values. In the first decile, the average annual family income is only $113,000. In the ninth decile, it is $476,000. What is the meaning of the ninth decile? That is also your 90th percentile. And it tells us that at least 90% of all families have average annual income less than or equal to 476,000 pesos. Or at least 10% of the families have average annual income greater than or equal to 476,000 pesos. Now, I want you all to recall your average annual family income that you computed earlier. Okay? Are you ready? If your family belongs to the ninth decile, this means that at least 90% of all families in the country have average annual income less than or equal to your average annual family income. And yet, oftentimes, we complain a lot that we don't have this and we don't have that. But we see here that there are many families with average annual income that are much lower than ours. So, given this data, we need to change our perspective and be thankful for what we have. Well, that ends our discussion on the measures of location.